We have got ourselves a very unique race coming up this weekend for NASCAR DFS because it is up in Loudon, New Hampshire, and we don't have a lot of data on what to expect for this weekend because it is only the fourth race this year to use the higher horsepower package. It is also only the third race at a slow, flat track, and one of those was before the COVID-19 layoff. The other was in Martinsville. Not a ton of similarities here. So we're kind of flying in with limited data, trying to figure out how we want to play things. That's the downside. The good side is that we do have a pretty definitive strategy from a starting position perspective of what we want to value and where we want to target drivers, which does narrow down the list a little bit. So let's dive on in, try to identify those ideal starting positions, and go from there. Welcome on into the Heat Check Fantasy Podcast, powered by numberFire. That's right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network and numberFire.com. My name is Jim Sonis. I am a senior writer and analyst for numberFire.com, here to break down the Foxwoods Resort Casino 301, which is coming up on Sunday. 3 p.m. is when the race begins. Now, I'd assume lock will be at that exact same time over on FanDuel, so plenty of time to fill out lineups between when they draw for the starting order, which will likely be Thursday night, and between when race locks on Sunday. Before we dive into this specific race, a quick mention that we got a whole lot of stuff going on the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed. Not just NASCAR, not just baseball, which is every day with the solo shot. We also have the Daily ISO with Tom Vecchio, breaking down each day's NBA slate. The one for Thursday already posted. The one for Friday, I believe we posted on Thursday night. Also, Tom has started up the Daily Deke, which is an NHL podcast that goes up every weekday as well, right here on the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed. Austin Swaim, a UFC podcast, will be posted later on today. We'll have PGA next week for the PGA Championship. So we're just kind of loaded with podcasts. 6 different sports this week alone on the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed, and a lot of those being recorded live on YouTube as well. Shout out to those of you watching on YouTube right now. So subscribe to the FanDuel YouTube page, but also subscribe to the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed wherever you get your podcasts. And if you like what you hear, please leave us a rating and review as well. For years, numberFire's premium subscription service has provided our users with expert analysis, survivor pool tools, and most importantly, the fantasy football draft kit, all for up to $49.99 a month. Now, as a way of saying thank you to our community for years of support, numberFire is rolling out a new premium package for just $9.99 a month. They'll provide you with all the sports betting and daily fantasy tools you need year-round. The best part is that expert analysis, those survivor tools, and yes, even the draft kit are now free. Everything from that perspective, free. All the content is free over at numberFire. So just head to numberFire.com, check out the new and improved site, and take advantage of the new premium package. Let's take a look at the track here up in New Hampshire. And as mentioned, a bit of a unicorn from a track type perspective because it is short, it is slow, it is flat. That is not a super common track type in NASCAR. Typically, we have 7 races per year that will check those 3 boxes, but this year we've had a schedule change because of the COVID-19 layoff. The first Richmond race got lopped off due to COVID-19. So the slow, flat tracks, even rarer this year than they usually are. That means we have only 2 similar races to look at so far this year. One in Phoenix, one in Martinsville. Phoenix, very similar to New Hampshire, but it happened before the COVID-19 layoff. Martinsville, shaped like a paperclip, very unique as well. So we don't have a great idea of what to expect this weekend. What we can expect, though, is that it will be tough to pass in New Hampshire. That it was true whether they were in the 2019 package or the one before that. They are back now to the package used in the 2017 races and the 2018 race. And it means we'll have to emphasize getting 2 lap leaders per lineup, and they may come from a very specific starting zone. From 2017 through 2019, which is a 4-race sample, at least 2 drivers led 80 or more laps in all 4 races. Almost all of those drivers started right at the front of the field. 5 of those 8 drivers started on the front row. So 5 drivers in the front row in a 4-race span. You do the math there. Someone on the front row is probably going to do pretty well on Sunday. 6 of those 8 drivers started within the top 5 spots, so within the first 3 rows, and only one of them started outside the front 4 rows. That was Denny Hamlin last year, who started 23rd, led a bunch of laps, and finished well. But I think that Hamlin, we can deem him as being very much the exception rather than the rule here. we've been doing this ever since the qualifying order has been set this way. We've been targeting multiple drivers inside the top 12 pretty much this entire time. But here, I think we do need to care where they start within those top 12 spots rather than just that they are within the top 12 and not caring where they are within there. I will be bumping up drivers who draw within the front half of the top 12, which is kind of the opposite of what we've done at previous spots where you want to get the place differential. Here, it's hard to pass. You need drivers starting up front who can lead laps early and often. I'll be even higher on those who draw in the front row, but in general, I want my drivers starting within the front couple of rows. I'm not going to disregard who I think will be fast overall, but if a driver I am broadly interested in draws first or second, I am going to be pretty hard at them, and I think that it makes sense to do so based on the way things have played out in the past in New Hampshire. So usually we're bumping up drivers who draw poorly. This week we're bumping up drivers who draw at the front end of that front tier. So that's the way we're broadly looking at things for this weekend. That does not mean I will ignore the drivers who draw in the back half of the top 12. I will just use the waves strategy to get them in there. So let's say you love Kyle Busch this weekend, and Kyle Busch draws 11th. That's a tough because we're talking about how we like guys at the front end of the top 12. I would still use Kyle Busch in that scenario. But what I would do is pair him with a driver who draws in the top couple of rows who can lead laps early on. That way, that person can lead laps in the first stage, and then while Busch works his way forward, you can still get those laps led. You can also get them once Busch leads later on and can potentially get a good finish there. So for once, I actually do care quite a bit about where drivers draw within the top 12 spots. I want at least one driver starting near the front in pretty much every lineup. I think that's the best way to phrase things for this weekend. That's the studs. For the value plays, I don't care as much as usual about where they draw. A lot of, looking at low dollar options in the past here in New Hampshire, a lot of them have paid off despite starting in the front half of the field. Of the 10 drivers in perfect lineups in the past 2 New Hampshire races, only 2 of them started lower than 18th. One of those was Hamlin last year, obviously kind of a weird situation with him, but the other was Ryan Newman, who started 26th. So the other 8 drivers all started in the top 18 positions. That's because it's tough to pass here. And what that means is that the speed gap between one driver and the car in front of them has to be higher for them to complete that pass. So I'm not going to automatically bump up value plays who draw toward the bottom end of their tier. It also means I will not bump down the value plays who draw toward the front of their tier. I haven't used many drivers starting in 13th or 14th since they started using this method to set the field, but that will likely change this weekend. Like, let's say Matty Benedetto, a value play that I like, draws 14th. I am still going to have Matty Benedetto likely be part of my core because passing is so tough here, speed matters a lot, and it's going to be hard to find big place differential guys. So just kind of go with the drivers you think will finish best, almost regardless of where they start. Now to be clear, place differential points will still matter. Christopher Bell is outside the top 24 in owner points, so he could start as low as 36th. And I love that because that could lead to a lot of place differential, and some fast cars could start in the 20s. As long as they are a good amount faster than the car starting right in front of them, I'm going to be into that. You can make passes when you are faster than the other cars. But I just don't think we should sell out for place differential as we do at some other tracks. Instead, we should accept it when it's available to us, but we can also use value plays starting closer to the front if we think they will finish there as well. As far as the data to key in on, I'll be putting more weight on track history than usual because the data from this year is pretty spotty, as mentioned, and it's a super unique track. So I'm normally skeptical of track history. I tend to downplay it relative to current form, but here I will allow it to be a bigger priority for me as the current form data, not as good because we don't have a lot of races at tracks similar to what we'll see in New Hampshire for this weekend. So to recap, strategies for this weekend, I want 2 drivers in the top 12, and I want at least one of them to start within the front couple of rows. And if they're starting the front row, even better. I would use the waves strategy if you want to use a driver starting further back within those top 12 spots, but you don't need to. Like if your 2 favorite drivers, let's say you love Kyle Busch and Brad Keselowski, if they're both starting on the front row, use both. I don't care. They can both get enough upside via laps led to pay off. So you don't need to use waves. I would just say use waves if you want to use someone driving or starting further back within the top 12. I'm also saying you shouldn't bump down value plays who draw towards the front end of their tier. As long as you think they can finish well, they can still pay off. We should accept place differential where it is presented to you, specifically Christopher Bell. Again, just kind of how it goes. Definitely take it if he's presented to you as a major place differential person, but don't force it with place differential. And I would put more stock in track history than usual this weekend. With that said, let's dive into the tier-by-tier breakdown for this weekend over on FanDuel, starting off with the elite tier. That is Kevin Harvick at $14,200 through Martin Truex Jr., who is 12-2. And Harvick is number one in this tier for me. No real questions about that. I think it's pretty easy. Denny Hamlin, given the way he's been driving, probably has to be number two. That is easy for me to say, but I think that Busch does at least give Denny Hamlin a run for his money for that second spot. Busch actually ranks second in my model behind Kevin Harvick straight up. It is the best model rating for Kyle Busch that he has had in my model since Phoenix. And that was before the COVID-19 layoff. That was when we had practice. Busch has not looked this good since that race. So the model's been off of Kyle Busch, but it's slowly coming back in on him now with some better recent runs recently. He also finished third in Phoenix, sixth place, average running position there for him. He has back-to-back top 7 average running positions entering this week, and he also ran well in Bristol, the other race with the higher horsepower package. So as we have discussed, I've been low on Busch for a while now, but I do like him as a win bet at 8-1, and I think for DFS, this is a good time to buy low on Busch at 12-6. I have hyped up Busch twice, I think, so far this year. One was in Kentucky, I think. That one did not work out. I think this one could be different as they go to New Hampshire for this week. Chase Elliott has had some good runs on tracks like this in the past, and Martin Truex Jr. has good history on this track. He also won in Martinsville, so I have been on anybody in this tier, but I feel pretty okay ranking them in the order of Harvick 1, Hamlin 2, Kyle Busch 3, Truex 4, and I think that Chase Elliott is a tier below Martin Truex Jr. So I think for me, I feel pretty good about that ranking. Harvick, Hamlin, Busch, Truex, Chase among that top tier. The second tier on FanDuel is Brad Keselowski at $12,000 through Eric Jones at 10-3. And of the drivers in this tier, Keselowski is highest in my model. And this is just straight up, before accounting for where they start, because I don't know where they're starting yet. But Keselowski is first in this tier. We talked about this prior to the Bristol race. My model doesn't usually like Keselowski because he does not dominate races, and it values drivers who do exactly that. But Keselowski actually ranks third overall this week behind Harvick and Busch. You know, Keselowski doesn't have the same track history as guys like Hamlin or Harvick or Busch, but he's generally really good on the short flat tracks. He was awesome in Martinsville last year. He can do well on this track type. So I'll be higher on Keselowski than usual. Not a guy I tend to value as much, but I think that here is a good time to buy in. I do like his teammates as well. Those are Ryan Blaney and Joey Logano. Logano won in Phoenix. I would say Blaney had the best car in Martinsville, came back up through the field a couple of different times, and both those drivers are pretty cheap. I would also mention that Eric Almirola could be a threat to lead laps if he starts up front. He was third here in 2018, led 42 laps in that race, and could have won that race if things had broken a bit different for him. So I'm going to rank Almirola behind the Penske drivers, but if he happens to draw well, I am not opposed to giving him a spin. So I'm ranking this tier, Keselowski 1, Blaney 2, Logano 3, Almirola 4, and then Eric Jones 5. I am lower on Jones just because he'll be starting further back. He won't lead laps, comes with a higher opportunity cost. He's been good at New Hampshire in the past, but I think given those issues, given the emphasis on laps led, it's harder for me to get to Eric Jones unless he is the third driver in my lineup, in which case I'd probably have to punt for one of the spots. But if I can get there, I'll do it. I just need to make sure I get two guys in the top 12, and then Jones is kind of a luxury after that. The mid-range on FanDuel is Kurt Busch at $10,000 through William Byron at $8,500. And Kurt Busch is similar to Almirola, where he could draw right at the front of the pack. He had an 8th place average running position here last year. He was 4th the year before that. So I think that I'm viewing Busch similar to Almirola, where I'm probably not in on them if they draw towards the back half of the top 12. But if I get them right at the front, they could be cheap sources of laps led. And I think that, like let's say there's a scenario where Kurt Busch draws the pole and then a couple of guys I like draw towards the bottom half of the top 12. Maybe I jam in 3 drivers in the top 12 and go that way and try to scoop up a bunch of laps led. That could be worthwhile depending on the way the draw works, but Busch and Almirola both in that same range where, in consideration, if they could be a cheap source of laps led. One guy in this tier will start between 25th and 36th. As mentioned, that is Christopher Bell, and I am going to be riding him in cash games this week pretty much no matter what. Bell fell back outside the top 24 in owner points the past week, or his team did, I should say, and track position is tough to gain. So it is not a major positive to be in the back. But again, Bell will be faster than a lot of guys around him, and that does matter. It also helps that Christopher Bell, disgusting at this track in the lower series. He won both his Xfinity Series races here in 2018 and 2019, and out of 400 total laps, he led 279 of those. He also finished first and second in his True Truck Series races at this track. So Bell, even at $9,000, is among the best plays on this slate. He will be in my cash game lineup even if he draws 25th. I just think he is that good, and I think that he should be able to pass here. So count me in on Christopher Bell at $9,000. As far as those starting between 13th and 24th, the guy highest on my list is Matty Benedetto because he was awesome here last year in the car Christopher Bell will be driving, which is not as good as the equipment that DiBenedetto has right now. And DiBenedetto finished 5th in that race. Was not a fluke. He had an 11th place average running position in that race as well, and he's been running really well recently. DiBenedetto, a top 11 average running position on both the short flat tracks so far this year. So DiBenedetto could pick up a good number of spots. And again, I'm okay with him even if he draws towards the front end of this tier. I am okay with Jimmy Johnson at $9,300, but DiBenedetto, number 1 in this tier among the middling place differential guys, whereas Christopher Bell will be tops overall in this tier for me. The value plays on FanDuel are Tyler Reddick at $8,200 through Austin Dillon at $7,000. Reddick wasn't as good here in the lower series as Bell. He never finished better than 4th. Cole Custer was second behind Bell last year in the Xfinity Series, and he also won in the Truck Series here during his age 16 season. He was not even allowed to drive on bigger tracks at that time, but he won here in his age 16 season. So between the non-Bell rookies, I'd put Custer above Tyler Reddick, probably by a pretty good margin for this weekend. My favorite driver in this tier, though, among the value plays, is a guy we don't discuss very often. That's actually Ryan Newman at $7,400. Newman is really good on this specific track. He finished 6th and 7th here in the past 2 years. He has had a top 15 average running position in 3 straight New Hampshire races, and he also ran really well in Martinsville. So Newman, $7,400. I like him a lot as a value play. I'd probably put him a hair above Custer, but both those guys are really solid as guys in the 7,000 range for this weekend. The punting tier on FanDuel is Ricky Stenhouse Jr. at $6,800 on down, and a couple of guys here are interesting for me. One is Chris Buescher at $6,000. I liked him last week. It did not work out, but he will start between 13th and 24th. Did have a 15th place average running position here last year. He was also good in Martinsville, similar to Newman. So I would prefer Buescher if he draws further back. This is one situation where I will put Wade in where he draws, but Buescher will be on this list for me pretty much regardless, just because he's so cheap at $6,000. If you want to jam in potentially 3 lap leaders or maybe get Eric Jones, the place differential guy, Buescher is a good route for doing so. The other guy worth mentioning down here is actually Ryan Preece. And Preece has been terrible so far this year. Not him, just a lot of circumstances have been terrible. He had a streak of 3 straight races where Preece finished dead last. It's not great, Bob. But Preece mops up on this track. He has a couple of podium finishes here in the Xfinity Series, and he will start, along with Christopher Bell, between 25th and 36th. Preece is only $5,500. I know the current form is absolutely terrible, but I will take that for $5,500. Big potential place differential guy, good track history. This may be the week where Ryan Preece finally rights that ship. John Hunter Nemechek was 4th year in the Xfinity Series in 2018. Also has 2 top 5s in the Truck Series. He's fine, especially if he draws in the 30s, but I would rank Preece higher just for this one race. The ranking between Nemechek and Buescher depends on where they draw. Like if they're near each other, give me Buescher. If they're super far apart, like Buescher is 13th and Nemechek is 36th, obviously then I would go with Nemechek, but the closer they draw, the more I favor Buescher. All right, that is a tier-by-tier breakdown. Let's finish up with picks to win for this weekend out in New Hampshire. I'm going to stick with the model. The model says Kevin Harvick, so I'm technically not sticking with the model, deviating a bit, but I do want to go Kyle Busch to win this weekend. He has not won he's won once in the past calendar year. That was the championship race, so he was the champion, but the struggles for him span beyond just this year. But he's shown a little bit of life recently, really good on this track, and this track type. So I think that Busch rights the ship this weekend and gets back into victory lane. As far as the driver below $10,000, give me Matty Benedetto. Again, really fast year last year, despite having lesser equipment than what he has right now. He will not start at the front, which is definitely a concern, but I think that he is good enough to make up that track position, get himself in the top 10, get himself a good finish. So picks to win this weekend are Kyle Busch and Matty Benedetto in the respective salary tiers on FanDuel. That is all that we have for today. Again, the starting order should be set later tonight on Thursday, so plenty of time to fill out lineups with all the data that you may have. Interesting week for sure. We'll learn a lot about drivers at this track type this weekend, but maybe kind of tricky to know who will be good, but I think we should have the keys to fill out solid FanDuel lineups. Once again, a big reminder to check out all the podcasts on the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed, MLB, NBA, NHL, NASCAR, UFC, and then next week again, PGA. So a lot of great stuff there. Make sure you are subscribed. If you like what you hear, please leave a rating and review as well. Big thank you to Calvin Theobald, our video producer, for the video side of things here today. Thank you, Cal, as always. And of course, thank you to all of you for tuning in. Good luck with your NASCAR DFS lineups this weekend. We'll talk to you again soon. This has been the Heat Check Fantasy Podcast powered by numberFire.